Introduce our first speaker. We want to give a big thank you to all of our sponsors and our presenting sponsor, the UNH Graduate Program. And then our supporting sponsors, the NHSBDC and the UNH Center for Business Analytics for helping to make this event possible. We also want to acknowledge our online audience joining us today. And our first speaker of the day is Mike Proulx, Vice President and Research Director of Forrester. He will be giving us an overview of the metaverse. Mike Proulx leads Forrester's CMO research team focused on the top issues and opportunities facing B2C marketing executives. His team of industry analysts publishes research, delivers thought leadership, and conducts client advisories on cutting-edge topics related to marketing trends, consumer behavior, brand strategy, digital transformation, and the agency landscape. We welcome Mike, who is a proud UNH graduate and Wildcat.
Thanks, Shelby. First to the key, first to the egg. This is the mantra of a movie that I saw that changed my life. That might be a little bit melodramatic, but this movie was almost 5 years ago. I walked into a brand new AMC movie theater, the IMAX in Dorchester, Massachusetts. It was next to my buddy Phil, and saw this movie, and at the end of it, I was just amazed. And of course, I'm talking about the movie Ready Player One. Ready Player One sets up this whole notion of the Oasis, which is akin to the metaverse. The Oasis is a virtual world where you can be whoever you want, you can express yourself any way you want, work, play, meet friends, love, all sorts of things. And what this movie did is just to begin to set up what's possible in the eventual metaverse. And I was so excited about it, I actually tweeted how, for me, it was sort of like a virtual Goonies, which is an important movie to me. Yeah, I loved all the metaverse stuff in Ready Player One, but I probably like the 80s references the most. The movie didn't mention the term metaverse. The term metaverse actually is fairly new to our cultural lexicon. It was coined a while ago, but you can see from Google Trends that it really peaked last year. What's going on with all of this hype? Is the metaverse here today? These are some of the questions that I'm going to answer. Forrester has published now over 8 reports about the metaverse, and the state of the metaverse was our first one, and it really sets up our company's point of view on distilling the hype from the reality. We define the metaverse as a 3D experience layer of the internet. So what does that mean? Well, if we think about the internet that Diane was just talking about as really the one-dimensional layer of the internet, and then the World Wide Web being the 2D layer that sits atop the internet, the metaverse will be the 3D layer, and it's inherently spatial. It's full of objects. You can navigate through it. As I mentioned, there's a lot of hype, and what I would call reckless headlines like this is only adding to the industry hype. I do this thing when I talk about the metaverse to our clients where I show these headlines and I say, hey, you've all seen these headlines within the past year, right? And inevitably, people nod their heads. But here's the thing, these headlines, they're from 15 years ago. These are the headlines from today. They're very similar. So the big question is, what has changed over the past 15 years that has made the metaverse into society such a big deal right now? What's different versus 2007? Well, we've identified 4 main things that are different from 2007. The first is infrastructure. There's a lot of companies that are doubling down on billions of dollars of investment. You know them, Meta, Microsoft, Epic Games, just to name a few. There's more scale, arguably, and I'm going to come back to this, in some of the 3D immersive worlds, especially Roblox. Some of you probably participate in Roblox. or your younger brothers and sisters do for sure. The fidelity is better now in these immersive spaces than they were during the early days of Second Life. We still have a ways to go. I'm psyched that Meta Horizon Worlds avatars will finally be getting legs. And then there's collaboration that has to take place in order to realize the true vision of a connected metaverse. And there's an organization called the Metaverse Standards Forum that was just established this past June that has over 5,000 member organizations now that are working on short-term plans to find wins in the evolution of the metaverse. But with all of this happening, there is so much confusion and speculation about what the metaverse is or isn't. One of the top questions that Forrester clients ask us is, are we behind if we're not doing something now? Help me navigate the hype versus what's actually real. Does the metaverse even exist today is a big question. So here's a couple of myths that I'm going to bust, and this is from the standpoint of Forrester's point of view. So Forrester does not believe that the metaverse exists today. And in fact, we don't believe it will exist until there are standardizations of interoperability and interconnectivity amongst virtual worlds and immersive spaces. What exists today are simply standalone spaces like Decentraland and Roblox, and I'll talk about some of these things. The second of 4 myths that I'll talk about today is there will be multiple metaverses. We don't believe that. Forrester believes that the metaverse is a singular phenomenon, just like there's one World Wide Web and there's one internet. But of course, the metaverse will be comprised of different types of experiences within it. The third myth, the metaverse is dependent on Web3. This is probably the most controversial one. Forrester does not believe that for the metaverse to exist, that it has to rely on quote unquote Web3. In fact, while it might eventually, as it actualizes and Web3 principles and technologies, and I'm using air quotes for a reason, manifest themselves more readily, it might rely on things like cryptocurrencies and blockchains. But to have the 3D experience layer of the internet, you don't necessarily need Web3 technologies. And the fourth myth, the metaverse is a repackaging of VR. Absolutely not. Despite what Meta's TV spots say, where they talk about the metaverse being virtual, augmented reality is a big important factor of the metaverse. And also, the metaverse will come to our physical spaces at some point in time as well. You don't simply need a VR headset to experience the metaverse. I'm not going to go into this into detail, only to say that where Forrester believes we are right now in the metaverse's maturity is in the precursor era of the metaverse, these standalone virtual and immersive spaces that I mentioned. So if we're in the precursor era of the metaverse, what are some examples? Well, we can categorize them into those worlds or platforms that leverage blockchains versus those that do not. You've probably heard of some of these, Decentraland and the Sandbox, which, by the way, have very, very low monthly active users at the moment, under 500,000 monthly active users. In fact, there was a report that Decentraland in one day had just 38 users on that one day. On the left-hand side are non-blockchain platforms, Meta Horizon Worlds and Roblox. Roblox is approaching almost 60 million daily active users. And Horizon Worlds, well, it still remains a relative ghost town. And if you listen to Meta's Q4 earnings just the other day, you will see that they have a ways to go to get any type of scale. There are multiple brands that are experimenting, and here's an example of something that Fidelity has done on Decentraland. And you might ask, why on earth would Fidelity activate on a platform that, Mike, you just said had pretty low users? Well, Fidelity at the time had just recently announced that they're embracing cryptocurrency as part of their service offerings, and they wanted to be on a platform that leveraged crypto and leveraged blockchain, and had users that were interested in that, and that's exactly what they did. And so it made sense, and I'll talk more about brand fit to platform in a second. Now the big question, are people actually excited about the metaverse? We have been talking with consumers and surveying consumers over and over and over again over the past year, and the needle just hasn't moved yet. Only 35% of US online adults say they're eager to spend time exploring the metaverse. And when we cut the data by generation, sure, it ticks up as generations become younger, but it's still not the majority for Gen Z yet. And the reason this is because it's still all theoretical. There's not great use cases that are out there that demonstrates how the metaverse will complement and enhance my day-to-day life. Now contrast that when we talk about the hype with the fact that 76% of B2C marketing executives told us in the beginning of the year that they plan to invest some budget for the metaverse. So there's an interesting gap and juxtaposition going on right now. And that's okay because we're talking about a very nascent technology in a nascent space right now. What we advise brands is absolutely test and learn in these metaverse precursors, but temper your expectations. You're not going to get a big ROI at the moment. At best, you'll probably get some great learnings. And certainly temper your investments. If you're spending millions of dollars right now, that's a tough road to hoe to justify to your CFO whether or not you're going to be able to get a return. So a couple things that we tell brands as they're considering exploring the metaverse. 4 questions we ask them to ask themselves. The first is the why. Why are you even doing this? What is your business objective? And if your business objective is simply to get the flashy industry headline, probably not the best one. I would say dig a little deeper on that one. The next is the who. Is your target audience even engaging in these spaces? Because if they're not, you're wasting your time and money in the here and now. And then the where. What platform makes sense to partner with that will allow you to scale as your metaverse objectives continue to advance? And then lastly, the what. The actual brand activation that you do, is it adding value to the experience of the users on that platform? Is it creating that value exchange? I'm going to showcase however many 5 examples of ways that brands can activate right now in metaverse precursors. And we've organized these into a couple of topics. The first is items. Items for your avatar or virtual products or goods. And one example that I particularly like is something that Under Armour did with a Steph Curry new sneaker, new shoe. If you were an NFT holder of this particular sneaker, it was called the Curry Flow, you would be able to have your avatar wear that sneaker in 3 different immersive platforms: Gala Games, Decentraland, and the Sandbox. And the reason I love this example is because it only begins to show the very early beginnings of interoperability, being able to take something that I've acquired, an item, and have that item follow me wherever I go, regardless of the individual platform. The second is an ability for your avatar or other elements of the actual gameplay to level up. Here's an example of what Estee Lauder did, where they partnered with Decentraland during Fashion Week in Decentraland. And in this case, they could have, to promote their advanced night repair product, which is like a skin lotion thing, they could have been literal about it, which would have been a mistake, to say, all right, I'm going to put lotion on my avatar. Why does your lotion need avatar? Your avatar's not going to get dry skin. So instead, if you acquired the NFT, it gave your avatar special abilities that allowed your avatar to glow, which demonstrated the feature and product benefit. The next are events, and we're seeing this happen more and more in a variety of spaces, including spaces like Fortnite. Here's an example of something that happened on one of the bigger platforms, Roblox, where they hosted the first music awards starring Lizzo, and Logitech sponsored it. Now, the problem and the risk for a brand in doing this, and this is the same thing with real-world partnerships, is that the brand could get lost in this, because the headline is Lizzo. And I doubt anybody that was participating in this remembers Logitech, and that Logitech is getting credit for sponsoring this event. So brands that are doing this stuff have to go a little deeper. 2 more to go. The next is product placement, which is tough to do. It's sort of the holy grail because it becomes part of the core gameplay itself. So Fortnite users, in this case, Fortnite partnered with Ferrari, and users were able to, in effect, test drive a brand new Ferrari as part of the actual gameplay itself. What a great way to have a brand experience that is something that you don't have to go to a separate destination on. Again, though, these are rare and sort of coveted by brands. And lastly, which is probably the most risky right now, are destinations in the quote-unquote metaverse that are built by brands and are actually branded. Wendy's announced Wendy's Verse on Meta Horizons. You look at the fidelity of this, which is pretty good. Again, no legs yet on these avatars. The amount of money and effort that was spent on this, Wendy's got a lot of headlines. They got some initial curiosity, but with under 500,000 users, in fact, 300,000 monthly active users on Meta Horizon Worlds right now, people aren't going back to this. There's nothing sticky about it. So what happens to these spaces? Well, another one that recently launched just a couple weeks ago was Walmart on Roblox. And what's interesting about this experience is they launched it not only on a platform that has massive amounts of users, but they launched it with an entire strategy to continue to program events and experiences on an always-on basis so that they are able to sustain the initial curiosity that people were checking it out on. And in the initial week, they had over 1 million visitors. I'm going to be curious to follow this to see, are users actually coming back? Do they want to continue to have experiences with Walmart on Roblox? And it all depends on the value that Walmart is giving those Roblox users. Lastly, a couple things before we open it up for questions is, while I've talked a lot about the consumer metaverse, one point that Forrester has made is that while consumer adoption and excitement right now is low for the metaverse, it's actually going to be enterprise use cases that are the surprise on-ramp to early adoption in the metaverse. And what I mean by that is things like digital twins in manufacturing, or the ability to better collaborate through anywhere work or hybrid work teams. These are things where we will experience metaverse-like technologies in the workplace and then be more apt to bring those experiences back home to us in the consumer metaverse. Finally, Forrester, this week, we launched our 2023 predictions across a whole bunch of categories, one of them being the metaverse. And the theme of our metaverse predictions is that a metaverse winter is coming in 2023. And the reason that is because of the economy. While there's been so much hype from brands this past year about the metaverse, the economy means that CMOs' budgets are going to get slashed. Innovation budgets are going to get slashed. There just simply is not going to be the money to justify testing and learning. We don't condone that necessarily, but that's just going to be a fact. Here's the good news, though. The good news is that it doesn't mean that the metaverse is going to come to a standstill, that the infrastructure is still being laid to help advance the eventual actualization of it. Back to Ready Player One, let me end with this. At the end of the movie, to spoil it for you, it was said by one of the main characters that people need to spend more time in the real world. I want to leave you with this thought, that our sense of the real world at some point in the not too distant future will be both what we experience in our physical worlds, but it will also be what we experience in our virtual worlds. And so this notion of the real world will have those two components to it. Thank you very much, everyone. And I believe someone's coming up, and we're going to take some questions.
Mike, that was great. Thank you so much for such a compelling talk about that topic. I do have our first virtual question, so we're going to dig right in. What about the metaverse in the medical field? Do you see use for VR for patients to visualize medical procedures prior to having them done? And how would this work? Thank you, Andrea, for your question.
100% on that with regards to the medical field, but what I would say is that's not the metaverse. So when we talk about enterprise use cases or medical use cases or healthcare, that is using metaverse-like technology. So it's simply using extended reality tech in order to enhance an industry. And it's already being done right now, especially for training for medical professionals. I didn't go into too much detail into the digital twin aspect of things, but digital twins are a big deal. That BMW example allows BMW to make their manufacturing process so much more efficient because they are figuring things out and optimizing in the digital or virtual twin manufacturing environment. And the same thing goes for the medical industry.
So I have a career question for you. Hi. So a lot of students in here, how many seniors are in here right now? So a lot of seniors are gonna be looking for jobs, and you talked about the CMO budget projections potentially. What jobs will be occurring in the industries that you talked about? We always tell students that some of the jobs that are gonna be out there are being invented now. So what do you see for a job outlook for those who are graduating next year?
Sure, yeah. Look, anybody that is studying data science, analytics, those are some of the hottest jobs that aren't going to be going away right now. If anything, during times of recessions, marketers need to even justify their expenditures and their marketing effectiveness even more. And so having people that can measure that effectiveness and work with data becomes particularly important. As it relates to the metaverse, some of the jobs that will eventually start to proliferate are going to be jobs doing 3D design and building out 3D worlds. And there's a whole host of sub-jobs underneath that entire career trajectory. I think you had a question.
Can you hear? Okay. So your one metaverse theory, I guess my question would be like, who do you think is going to own that? What is that going to look like? Is it going to be one corporate runs that? I mean, Ready Player Me was, or Ready Player One, Ready Player Me is the business. That was the movie for me, but I was kind of worried because the initial idea of the Oasis was, oh, it was a big corporation that kind of gave it away. But what is that going to look like? What is your theory there?
I'm so glad you brought that up because I did want to make that point, because Ready Player One had one fundamental flaw as it relates to the vision of the metaverse. It was one organization, it was one corporation, so it was designed by one organization originally, and there was a corporation that was trying to take it over and invade it with a bunch of essentially advertising. But the vision for the metaverse is that no one company will own it. And while Meta, formerly Facebook, is getting a lot of attention and attribution in relation to the metaverse because of their company name change, when we survey consumers, there's a lot of disdain for Meta because I think there's fear that Meta will try to infiltrate it or take it over. The good news, or the optimist in me, says, listens to Mark Zuckerberg, and he is at least signaling the right thing, saying that Meta cannot own the metaverse. It's going to require collaboration with its competition. And that's exactly what has to happen. And so that group, Metaverse Forum, Standards Forum, was formed so that companies can do that collaboration.
So I just have a quick question. I was wondering, what is the point of the metaverse and why are people so obsessed with it versus regular games? My interpretation of the metaverse and these worlds that you're talking about, I kind of just see it as a, more detailed Minecraft, for example.
Sure, it's a super fair question. And one of the challenges that we all have, and you're falling into the sort of that skeptic category, which is a fair place to be, is that we're looking at what exists today, and it's hard to imagine the possibilities beyond that. And so what exists today is exactly what you just described. They look like gaming environments. And in fact, gaming environments like Fortnite are embracing more expansive types of experiences like concerts, and they have plans to do more things within Epic Games. But there will come a time, if we can think about the fact of technology advances, devices, headsets will change. There may come a time where we're wearing contact lenses with augmented reality that will also allow us to immerse in virtual spaces. All of these things have the potential to completely disrupt the customer experience. And not just the customer experience, but our everyday lives. You know, Diane was talking about earlier the dawn of the internet, and I was actually at UNH my senior year when the World Wide Web officially launched in 1994 and 1995, and I remember I was right down the hall in the Student Senate office, and the head of MUSO, which I don't think is an organization that exists anymore, he runs into the Senate office and said, "I just saw the coolest thing." And I was like, "What is it?" And he's like, "I'm on this thing called Mosaic." It was one of the first browsers at the time, right before Netscape. And he showed us, and we were just all jaw-dropped at that very moment. And I look back in those early times when there was so many naysayers that we're never going to do commerce on the internet. That's never going to happen. And now look at what's going on here. So long-winded way of saying that what we know today is certainly not what it's going to be 10 years from now.
So my question is basically just like, why do you feel like things like Decentraland are struggling to kind of bring users on? Because me personally, I feel like they haven't done anything really to move me closer to the metaverse space. So what do you feel like the next step is then for them is to like bring people over there?
Yeah, you know, it's so funny. I literally got that question asked just the other day, and I didn't have a great answer. What I will say is Decentraland in particular, they do a ton of marketing. They put on lots of events. As I mentioned, they did that Metaverse Fashion Week. They continue to do themed-based events that will kind of draw people in from like a tentpole standpoint, but then usage sort of drops. It's a matter right now of appealing to a wider consumer base. And, you know, excuse the term, but the users on Decentraland right now really are catering to crypto bros. You know, that's sort of the core users. And I say that with data behind it when we've surveyed users as well. So it's a matter of awareness and scale for Decentraland. They simply don't have the same types of budgets that Roblox has and that Meta Horizon Worlds has. One of the reasons Roblox is so successful is because it embedded itself really early on with a young user base that's growing up with the product. But there's a lot more that both Decentraland and Sandbox and its competition needs to be doing to actually, as you said, demonstrate value to everyday people. Yes. Unfortunately, human beings are flawed. And you know, while the banner of Web3 and the metaverse has this utopian view of what it could be, and we talk about things and say the right things like privacy by design and ethics by design, and we all want that to happen, there are nefarious people within society. And so what needs to happen from the start, as we're all designing this thing and this future, is to have a set of governance, and I don't mean that from sort of this like top-down approach, but a set of agreed standards around decorum and privacy and ethics. Because there's already stuff taking place right now in the very early precursor days. Meta Horizon Worlds had to set up settings for proximity for virtual avatars because there were incidences where some avatars were getting, up in other people's business in that virtual world. You look at the NFT space, it is riddled right now with scams, and that's a problem. So the industry, the onus is on it to solve that before this thing scales up.
We have
Steve Prescott. Steven, you just got in trouble.
I did just get.
Do not tick
fine.
off the AV guy.
What is adding on to that, what is the prospect of government regulation to kind of control all this?
I mean, it's a fascinating question. If you look at the fact right now that the US government specifically is behind on things that don't even have to do with the metaverse. They're still playing catch up on basic internet, basic web, basic social media, let alone the metaverse. I think the place to watch is going to be in the EU that has much more strict standards, especially around data and privacy.
So Mike, we have one more virtual question over here from Grace. What impact do you see the metaverse having on the video game industry that currently use similar feeling environments?
Yeah, so in our State of the Metaverse report, what we talked about is the early adopters of the metaverse, they're gonna be gamers. And the reason that is because gamers are already familiar navigating around 3D environments. It's just a fact. So the impact will be that it's going to lift all ships. I mentioned Epic Games, which is the maker of Fortnite. They are thinking about themselves beyond just a core gaming environment to be able to open up to other types of experiences.
So why is Walmart and Wendy's using the metaverse? Are they selling NFTs or are they getting their name out there? And for the experience part, wouldn't like a sports team benefit more than something like Wendy's or Walmart?
All good questions. So the platforms that both Wendy's and Walmart activated on Meta Horizon Worlds and Roblox respectively, they're not on the blockchain. So there's no NFTs that are involved. They're testing and learning, just like every other brand. What it did was at least create some awareness. All of these brands, by the way, they are doing this for one main reason, and it's all of you. These brands want to reach Gen Z. They think that by doing experiments in the metaverse and being in places where they believe Gen Z is interacting, it will create a much greater loyalty and relationship between Gen Z and their brands. And you can be the judge on whether or not that's the right thing to do.
I guess throughout this entire speech, I've been, thinking about what it looks like from an everyday scale perspective of the metaverse, because the web and the internet obviously has become such an integral part of everything we do, from work, social, pretty much every facet of life, and especially for us as college students too, it's even more so. So what do you foresee this looking like on an everyday scale, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Is it gonna be something where you go to work and then, oh, you're gonna jump into the metaverse for lunch with your mom on a lunch break? Or I guess it's hard to envision how that's going to play out on an everyday scale.
Reasons that I mentioned that the technology is going to continue to rapidly advance. So there are use cases out there that we're simply not even able to conceive right now. But I will say this, it'll affect every single industry. Just think about education you brought up. Imagine being able to go to your classes, and be immersed in a virtual environment that brings to life things like, science concepts, or we talked about the medical field or laboratories. What a way to be able to learn through sight, sound, and motion and actually be immersed in particular environments. I think that's some of the most exciting pieces of where the metaverse could eventually take us all. All right. Well, again, great to be back at UNH. Thanks for having me. Great questions, everyone.